So good afternoon. Hope you had a great lunch and enjoyed the morning session. So we are coming on to track 2. The topic of this discussion, this session, is scaling up and exiting. And I would like to invite my co-panelists on stage. Dr. Shai Moses, he's the Consul for Trade and Economic Affairs, Consul General, Israel, Bangalore. Please. Sir, please. We have Pankaj Mitra, Director and Head, India, Cisco Investments and Acquisitions. Shrikant Power, Vice President, India, Diabeto, a Livingo health company. So you now know why we chose him. He just got acquired. Venkat Raju, he's a strategy consultant, investor, mentor, advisor, pretty much all in one, right? So, Venkat. And unfortunately, we are unable to get Arvind Vasu. He decided to ditch us at the last minute. Sorry, I'm just kidding. So, Arvind is still on the way. He will probably join us in 15-20 minutes. So, Arvind Vasu is the Senior Vice President, Asia Investments of ABB Technology Ventures, right? So, guys, today the topic is going to be a very interesting one, primarily for startups, founders, even SMEs, MSMEs. We did a master class on how to prepare for the eventuality, you know, in terms of M&A exit yesterday. And this was essentially very well received, very well received. In fact, initially, a lot of startups were essentially saying, hey, we are too small. We don't even know what the concept of M&A is. It's right now, we are just focused on product development. But I think after yesterday's insights, a lot of the startups went away with the entire thought process of, gosh, we need to be at least thinking through this. We need to be preparing for it. So what we have today, so we are going to try to kind of have a much wider variety of speakers this time. We're going to be trying to get their insights, what they think about scaling up of startups, what they think about eventual exits of startups. Maybe it's an IPO. Maybe this is more of an acquisition. Maybe it's an acqui-hire, right? So we're going to be delving into these areas. So just to give you kind of an introduction about these folks and what they want to be focusing on. So I would request Dr. Shai Moses to talk about the Israeli story. So Israel, as you know, this is the startup nation. We all, if you guys haven't, I would encourage you to read that book, The Startup Nation. It's just a fabulous piece of work. It goes through from the 80s how Israel made this happen, in terms of how they structured the fund of funds, which finally we have a India government startup fund of funds, right? How they structured it, how they went through the journey, what has been the learning. And this is incredible because a population of what, 6 to 7 million people? 8 million people. And it's the second or the third largest startup in country in the world, right? So we will be requesting Dr. Shai Moses to tell us a bit about the startup nation, how they did it, right? How they scale up in the valley and so forth. Shrikant would be talking more about his exit story. It was very recent. So Diabeto exited out recently. They were acquired by a company called Livingo. And frankly speaking, when I was talking with Shrikant, he went to the Bay Area to raise funding. And he decided to get acquired, right? So I just wanted your insights in terms of what really happened. You and your founder, what are you guys thinking about? Why did you guys bail out so early, if I may use those words, right? And then Pankaj, Cisco Ventures has kind of perfected the entire acquisition model. Gosh, back from our business days, business school days, we heard case stories, case studies about Cisco. From the 90s, I suppose, they have perfected this art. And these guys have also done many times kind of fund a startup to buy, right? Within 9 months, within 12 months, the startup gets an exit. Okay, so we'll be talking about that a bit more. And Venkat has been in New York as a banker. Then, probably in the late 30s, early 40s, he moved to Silicon Valley. He was running 2 startups. These were Kleiner Perkins funded startups. And he exited one of them, or 2, was it 2? Both, one of them. And then he came back to India. He moved to India, and right now he is a major investor, angel investor in startups and an advisor. So we would like to get his perspective, his thought, his story, the entire journey, how he took. So I'll probably get started first with Dr. Shai Moses. Your presentation is ready as well. So you could come on the stage, or you could talk from there, whatever works.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for the lovely introduction, and I'm happy to be here. As said, my name is Shai Moses. I'm the Economic Consul of Israel to South India, and we are based here in Bangalore. In a way, it's a very new consulate, only since 2013. And the decision of the Israeli government to establish here a consulate was because we see so much more business, trade, investment activities between South India and Israel. And especially here with a place like Bangalore, with the high-tech scene, it was very natural for us also to establish here the consulate. So my aim here is to, in a way, to look for these kinds of collaboration, sometimes to expose the Israeli technology to different kinds of partners here and clients, to see Israel being more active here in India as a market, to look at it as a market, but also to look with Indian companies together at the global markets. So we are very much engaged in different kinds of sectors. It can be agri-tech, it can be clean tech, it can be the different kinds of the high-tech, cloud, cyber, you name it. Usually we are working based on the demand and need that we see. And in this context, I was also looking for more into the more IoT and more specifically into the industrial IoT, which I wanted to elaborate a bit further. But again, thank you for the introduction, Som. So Israel, again, you're making my job a bit easier. Always exposing Israel, yes, as a kind of a hub of innovation, which I also concur, and I see it also from my first-hand experience there. And no, I'm not go over through all the history and the maybe the reasons that we happen to be more into the edge of technology. But again, just to bring in a nutshell that we are talking about 8.8 million people state, which we always again take pride that we say we are 8 million and together, and India is 1.3 billion people. So it's very nice that India and Israel together are 1.3 billion people. So in that sense, it's a small economy, but we are very active. There are in any given time more than 6,000 startups, active startups, that were working in this field, which again, I just got this information, the update information, what I understand, in India is around 10,000 active startups working on nowadays. So to have
technology startups.
Yes. Also this is the tech companies, tech startups. So in a way, yes, you have this kind of startup per capita, I think the leading in the world by far. And again, always focusing on the deep tech. Now, one of the reasons the focus in Israel is on deep tech is because the market itself is small. So from the beginning, each startup is looking for the global markets, naturally more to the US and Europe, but nowadays more towards Asia, and within Asia, China and India. And from day one, they have to compete. But afterwards, nobody will look at them. So from day one, the strategy of this kind of startups is to think, okay, what I'm going to do next. And in that way, exit is not a dirty word in that sense. So already from start, you need to think what and how I'm building myself, what I'm going to do in terms of clients, and then eventually in terms of profitability. So a little bit of figures. So we had kind of exits of Israeli companies, tech companies, in 2017 around $23 billion. But again, note that one deal was making this big amount. Mobileye was acquired by Intel last year for around $15.5 billion, I think. Which, by the way, we were in touch with Intel here and Mobileye also before the acquisition itself. And it was very interesting to note that Mobileye, one of their places they wanted to experiment with these kinds of autonomous driving assistance system and platform, was in India, was in Bangalore, by the way. So how you implement these kinds of semi-autonomous prevention accident disaster system in Bangalore with all this traffic here? They say if they can do it here, they can do it everywhere in the world. So this was interesting, and the team of Intel here is very much active on this topic now. So again, after the acquisitions, Mobileye team and Intel team here are very active to implement it in India. So different kinds of deal. This $15 billion. Average exit multiple 3.9. Also, I think it's a very nice and interesting figure. Again, usually we have investments. You can see different kinds of varieties, how you do the exit, but you always need to show these kinds of momentum and drill. So whenever you have new investments, they always also look, okay, what kind of exit happened during this time. So although it's a new money coming from new investors or new startup, they also look what happened there. And at least to have this kind of multiple, at least the money that was already invested in these kinds of exited startups was returning. Again, it's quite positive because we know the statistics that also 85 to 90% of startups fail, right? So to have these kinds of average, it's something that nurture itself and the ecosystem in order to provide. Again, it's a thought when you thought about India, what kind of ecosystem you should have here, what kind of trends and results in order to see that the ecosystem is viable. This is another interesting statistic that I took, is that the non-VC-backed exits were higher than the VC-backed exits, which means, again, and there is a lot of importance and respect for the VC guys and the way there, but it's not the only way. It's not the only way to get the VC money, which always becomes more and more selective in that way. In Israel, again, because it's becoming more and more sophisticated ecosystem, you see more and more money willing to be invested in the later stages and Series A or post-Series A than to have it in the seed or pre-seed time. For that we have, for example, as a government, the Innovation Authority and the chief scientist who is willing to invest, and we allocate quite a budget for it, is around, let's say, $1 billion annually, government money, to invest in the startups that the regular VC will not invest. Because he's saying, okay, I'm willing to take the risk and the failure, and if it's already being financed by, or it's willing to be financed by private sector, so there's no role for me as a government per se. Which also brings me to another statistics that is always interesting also to know, that in Israel, we invest in R&D around 4% of the GDP. Okay, so whenever now I'm reading in the media, sometimes we debate in India 0.5%, or maybe we'll take it to 0.7%. There's a lot of room still that we can invest public and private money. By the way, most of of this figure is coming from private money, from the MNCs and other global investors. So more recently, again, Israeli high-tech companies raised $5.5 billion in 620 deals, which I also take interesting because, as we mentioned, there are like 6,000 startups in a way active. So if you have 600 deals in a year, which is again existing startups and new startups in a way engaging, so you have a relatively high figure of in a way of validation that these startups are getting interest and are interesting for different kind of investors. More recently, again, it's very new. So the first half of 2018, we saw some exit activity of 6.2 billion. And in that sense, also we can note Orbotech, which you can also say it's a kind of industrial IoT company acquired by KLA Tencor, the MNC, for 3.5 billion. So, you want me to continue?
No, we will cover this kind of a bit later during the Q&A session, right? Okay. So thanks, Dr. Shai Moses.
Okay, I will stop here. Maybe later
I think the good piece is, please have a seat. Please. So the good piece is he has given kind of a very broad brushstrokes about the Israel startups, how they did it, and so forth. And we will have enough time for question and answers. What I think we are more interested to learn is how did these startups scale up to get these phenomenal exits? Those are the pieces we'd love to delve into. But in the interest of time, I would request Shrikant Pawar to kind of talk about, specifically focus on the Diabeto exit, right? How and when you guys went for a fundraise, you decided to give it up at this point, at this stage. What was going on in your mind, and how did you guys make a decision? Please. Why don't you use the mic? Yeah, please go ahead. Not on.
Is this better? Hello? Yeah. Thank you so much, Som, for giving me the chance of speaking about our Diabeto story. So we started Diabeto in 2012, and IoT was, the term IoT was not coined then. We were one of the India's first medical technology startups coming up. You know, it's just because the team was working only on software before, and we never worked on hardware, and we just thought that, okay, hardware is cool, let's just start working on hardware. And I was the 5th employee at usendit.com. This is way back in 2004 in Silicon Valley. And then, you know, in the early 2000s, the mantra for all the startup founders who are starting is that, you know, let's start up and do an IPO. That's it. That was the thing. There's nothing in between. And you know, but you know, we also were thinking about the same thing when we actually started off. But then we realized that actually about 97% of the startups, when they are raising money, something comes up, like a great deal comes up, the board says that, okay, fine, let's just take it, and we'll just finish it off. Actually, that was kind of our story. We were in Silicon Valley and raising money, and suddenly one of the companies, they came to us saying that, you know, we are interested in investing in you, but how about if we give you a good deal, would you take it? And you know, it was completely surprising for us that, you know, what happened. And the board had actually our board was really good, because it was 50-50% thing that they were saying that let's not exit at this point, it's too early. And other guys were saying that let's just exit, it's a great deal. So it was a tough decision actually, and then we figured out that, you know, the deal was really great. And actually it happened in such a way that, you know, as you were talking in the M&A strategy, that, you know, when we actually started in 2012, I was traveling to Silicon Valley, and I was, you know, just telling the investors that, hey, we are thinking of working on this product. What do you think about it? We are not asking for money. We are just telling you that, you know, we're working on the product. We went and met our competitors in 2012 itself when we were starting up. And in 2013, when I met them, we already got one offer for acquisition in 2013 itself. But that acquisition, did not go through because we were not ready. We did not have FDA approval then. So, that gave an idea that, yes, we were constantly in touch with our competitors who were like way, way, way beyond our capacity. But, they had us on the radar and they knew our journey, and that just helped us. And, we were just ready. And, typically the acquisition processes, they take maybe in 3 to 6 months, depending upon if they find cockroaches in your balance sheet or whatever and stuff like that. But ours was record fast, and we finished that in just 2 months flat because we had a great, great legal team behind us, and we had our due diligence done it was really smooth.
Great. So the dating process, the courtship process for these guys were much longer, right? Last 3-4 years before the acquisition actually happened, and this is a pretty essential step. I'd like to shift gears now over to I'll go with Pankaj. Pankaj, if you can just share some insights within Cisco, whatever you can share, being a corporate guy.
Sure.
Right?
So first
about
of
the
all,
acquisition process, about the entire process. How
Yeah.
do you guys go through? How do you guys think through it? And maybe you can cover a bit about the India angle as well.
yeah, okay. First of all, 2 months is fantastic. Never heard that before. So I'll give you a sense of how we think about acquisitions and investments from the Cisco side, right? So acquisitions, we look at 3 broad areas of how acquisitions can help Cisco. I think the first is portfolio expansion. And I'll give you a short story in each of them.
Fantastic.
The second is acceleration. So we know that we have to come up with something. How can we accelerate our own organic efforts? And the third is new markets, to kind of go where Cisco has not gone before, and that's best done inorganically. So just an example of the first one, expansion. So we invested in a company called OpenDNS, which has a cloud security solution. And the investment made sense because it gave us visibility into a new security solution that we didn't have. Ended up acquiring the same company about 12 months later. And the CEO of OpenDNS actually became the leader of our security business. So it was a fantastic acquisition. It gave us a product called Umbrella that you may still use today if you use the Cisco VPN client. So that's an example of how we invested in a startup and then acquired it to expand our portfolio. And then on the acceleration side, this was the time when SD-WAN was hot and everybody was talking software defined, and obviously Cisco wanted a play in that. So we invested in a company called VeloCloud. And this was a great company, and we ended up sitting on the board, getting insights for what's really happening in the SD-WAN market. And a few months later, we actually ended up acquiring another company in the same space called Viptela, which has turned out to be another fantastic acquisition for us. Basically gave us an entry into the SD-WAN space. So this was somewhere where we knew that we had to get into SD-WAN. We had an organic effort to do it, but we wanted to accelerate that through an acquisition. And I think on the third piece, new markets, the story about AppDynamics is pretty public, and how we acquired it for $3.7 billion, and it gave us a view into a completely new market for us. But I'd like to talk about something different. So a few years back, we were looking at IoT as a space to play in. And we must have invested in 20 startups in IoT just to get a sense of the market and visibility into what kind of startups are succeeding, what do enterprises need. And based on those 20 investments, we ended up acquiring Jasper for $1.5 billion. So that's an example of a new market expansion, right? So that's kind of in summary how Cisco thinks of it. There could be new markets to get into, there could be acceleration efforts and expansion.
So great, we'll come back to you with 4 more questions. So Venkat, would love to hear your thoughts, being a banker in the past to a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and now an advisor, mentor to multiple startups. Maybe a few examples from your own journey, and what would be if you were to give a top 2 advice to the startups, what would that be?
Sure. So Pankaj gave a pretty good idea into the perspective of a lens of an acquirer. And I will also state there is one more, and watch out. If you have a technology or a product that's truly disruptive, sometimes the acquirer just is going to acquire you to kill it. So watch out for that too, okay? So that said, let me give you some examples. I was armed as an entrepreneur because I had an experience of an acquirer before. And both my exits happened with Israeli companies, by the way. So this was the dot-com boom, and I was the head of products at VerticalNet, $15 billion corporation, largest marketplace operator, etc. But we were looking for some kick-ass trading software. And we tried, failed. We looked at various opportunities, and there was this Israeli startup called Tradium, and it had the best product out there. And it was basically both doing acceleration and plugging a vital gap for us. And more importantly, we wanted to make sure it didn't fall in the hands of our direct competitor. So primarily, it was us, the product group, telling the CorpDev M&A team, saying, go just make it happen. So one piece of advice is, in most of these deals, it is primarily either the business unit or the product teams asking the CorpDev team to go and seek. So if you're looking for building a relationship, think about that. Or if you're a product in a market or a geography, then the business units are going to have the final say. Unless, of course, the corporate has a defined mandate. They have a strategy and saying, here is the mandate, here's the CorpDev team, just go look for those guys. In that case, the conversation with the CorpDev team is okay. Otherwise, in most majority of situations, it is going to be the relationships or the threat you pose to the product teams or the business units within large corporations. Now, coming back to me as an entrepreneur, having done this deal on the other side of the fence, so we were in the data center infrastructure space. At that time, the so-called ITIL, this was a service delivery paradigm, IT infrastructure library that was being promoted, and it was going to transform how data centers and operations are going to be done. And it was a framework defined at the 100,000 level. We as a company basically helped productize that to make it executable. And we were one of the first in the market, and as So mentioned, it was a Kleiner Perkins back deal with Vinod Khosla sitting as the partner behind the deal here in my board. So the challenge here was clearly we were really getting customers, getting traction, went through Series C stage funding, and what next? And clearly there was interest on the part of several players, including the likes of IBM, HP, CA, BMC. So in terms of everybody wanting to come into the space, and the challenge here, and this goes back to the investor management, the board dynamics, and it's very, very important for you to think it through, because I mean, these days, unicorns, everybody talks in terms of multi-billions. At that time, still, we are, if at least a $500 million to $800 million company, we will not consider anything less. So what happened is then some of the major players, including the IBMs and the HPs, making a buy versus build decision, basically chose to walk away. So this is very, very important in terms of understanding the market timing. Don't go too soon, but also watch out, is there a consolidation happening? Or the potential major acquirers making the decision? That means you're going to slowly lose, or your options get reduced, and think it through. So luckily for me, at least I stood up and said, okay, because we didn't get the 500 million, but we found somebody called Mercury Interactive, another Israeli company, and which now ended up as part of HP. So my product is now sitting in a small piece inside the HP OpenSuite or wherever it is. So the point to think about is be careful about the acquirer's intent, be careful about the timing, about too soon, too late, and most important, the board dynamics, because further you raise multiple rounds, the valuation goes up. So clearly there are expectations on the part of the investors as well, which means your options of exit is going to be reduced drastically. And think it through and make sure before you take the money. And at multiple stages in the journey of the startup, you have to think through some of these decisions.
Great, thank you. So Arvind also just joined us. So we will start off with a few specific questions, and then I will ask Arvind for his perspectives as well. And I'm just standing out here because of this. I cannot see the audience, right? So, we all have talked about scale-up challenges for Indian startups. And this is a generic question, open to all. And I would have a very specific question to Dr. Shai Moses. How did these Israel startups overcome this? Many of us, we talk about, well, B2C is one piece. B2C is where Indian, because of the 1.3 billion population, we have got a large market. But for B2B and so forth, the market is kind of more global, right? And we obviously talk about scale-up challenges in India. That normal piece I hear is, gosh, lack of capital. We talk about lack of business talent. Most of the technologists are forming startups. We talk about lack of Indian customers or early adopters in India, right? We are not thinking big. There are challenges in global expansion. There's a lack of mentor advisory network. In the valley, you just go from one Starbucks to another. There will be lined up bunch of guys who have done it in the past, ready to help you, guide you, and so forth. So we lack that. So frankly speaking, what do you think? What would be your recommendation to early stage startups? So think about a scenario, they are ready to scale. They have found the right product market fit. And I'm talking about startups already revenue positive, $500,000 to $1 million in revenue. That is the stage the startup is in. What would be your recommendation to them? And they have an option to stay in India. They have an option to go global, and assume for the time being, the technology they are building is globally not out of the world, but competitive, right? So please, how did the Israel startups do it as well?
So I've been here for the last 2 years. So I would like also to share some of my personal thoughts. So in Israel, I think a significant part or a crucial part of this ecosystem is the presence of the multinational corporations. Mm-hmm. And most of the MNCs around the world have established some kind of R&D center or local presence, but mainly to think of involvement in these kinds of R&D. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about commercial R&D, applied R&D. So the fact that these companies acquiring startups, because usually this is a way to establish your first presence also in a country or so, to establish your R&D center in Israel, is to acquire a startup or kind of entity that will be the core bone of your activities there. So this generates itself to more and more involvement. And once the big company is there, then you see they are branching out to even more kind of areas, right? You have smart transportation, so everyone is going there, or you have digital health, or otherwise the big companies. Now in India, we have many,
the same R&D centers.
We have many MNCs.
Correct.
Historically, maybe it began with some kinds of more BPO, KPO services, or more kind of a design, or more kind of, back office or kind of services as such. But I think once these MNCs are more engaged into the R&D. Deep tech, R&D kind of facilities, then it's something that nurtures itself. Then you see also the ecosystem here, you always think of how it's becoming more and more significant, vibrant, and also globally marketing. So this is from the supply side. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that's a trend that is coming by. Mm-hmm. And again, the other MNCs and so can also validate that they want to invest more into the R&D operations here in India. Mm-hmm. And once we see that, also the opportunities for the Indian startups are growing. Now, going to the demand side, let's say the startups themselves. Mm-hmm. So the startup you mentioned, it's a big market in India. But is it a big market now, or it's a potential for a big market? Because if the big industry here in India is still not implementing these solutions, this industrial IoT solution, this advanced manufacturing solution as such, Then for the startup who say, okay, I want to go into this deep tech and going to try my best to solve some pain, then it still doesn't have a market here, let's say. But because it's big, so it still doesn't look abroad, right? It's still looking close by. So then this is kind of a dilemma. So I see that it's also changing. Okay? Again, from my perspective, I see the Tatas and the Reliance and the others are more active in Israel because they're looking for very innovative solutions. They're more active here in India. So the startups, the deep tech startups here, should have more and more these kinds of clients and markets, which again, just validate themselves here. So it's the right trend.
Evolving.
It's
The
evolving.
right timing.
We're still not there as such, but it's going there.
Fantastic. Arvind, what's your thoughts? You've been outside India, have been with ABB, what, 18 years, 20 years now? 20 years, right? And now in a different role as an ABB Tech Ventures guy. And you discuss with your team at a global level, the global startups and so forth. What's your perspectives from why Indian startups, I'm talking maybe about B2B startups, IoT startups, are not able to scale? Is it the lack of Indian customers? Is it just the fact that we are not thinking big enough? What are your thoughts?
I think the B2B and industrial oriented startups are few and far between. We're still at the beginning of this type of startup developing in India. We're seeing some, and when we look at Indian startups from a corporate venture perspective, we're not going to give any discounts for Indian startups because you're in India. We want technology that's on par with anything that's out there globally. In fact, the investment committee who finally decides on these investments, the business units who want to collaborate with the startups, will be benchmarking you with other global startups. So my advice would be start thinking global, start comparing yourself to the best in whatever area you're doing. And another thought that I have is in terms of corporates, if you're a startup and you want to collaborate with a corporate, money shouldn't be the only reason you go to them. And try and be different, try and be in some way pivot yourself that you're complementing the corporate. That helps you, because if you start doing exactly the same thing that the corporate does, you're eventually going to be seen as competition. And then you're locked in this relationship with the corporate. It doesn't get very innovative after that, because everyone starts protecting their turf, because the corporates always have a feeling, yeah, look, startups are going to come and steal my customers. And the startups are thinking the corporates are going to come and take my IP away. So, we need to bridge that. We need to have a level of trust. So it helps if you're complementing.
Correct. So, Srikanth, why don't you talk from the trenches? You have created the startup and so forth, right? What has been your challenges in terms of scaling up?
In India?
In India. In India or globally, but sitting in India, what has been your challenges?
The first challenge was that, we as Indians, we do not understand innovation.
That's a statement, guys. That's a solid statement. Please continue.
This is a major challenge because, when we started, we thought that, okay, we were in diabetes. India was then the diabetes capital of the world. Yes. So we thought that, yes, we are definitely going to succeed. It is definitely, the clinical studies have proven, and this is going to definitely be a thing. But when we would go to the doctors themselves, they would be like, what is the major challenge for us? The major challenge is that people do not know what glucometers are. So how would they actually use an accessory which is to a glucometer? In the US, in Europe, they were already using this complete technology, and but in here, we were going into the grassroots level. So actually we were then we were going back to the drawing board. When we started off, we were thinking of a B2C strategy. The advisors were also saying that, okay, let's do it. But then afterwards, after spending about 2 years, we understood that, B2C requires especially hardware, which is hard, and focusing on B2C, you require enormous amounts of funding to go into and tackle into the B2C. Right. So, and second thing is that, we still are talking about deep tech and machine learning and AI and cloud and all the jargons. But when you actually go and start pitching to even corporates, first of all, it will be very, very difficult to pitch to them. They will not, first not understand you, or maybe there might be many communication challenges with them. And the second thing would be, focusing on the right sector. That is, there will always be a challenge that, whether to go with B2C or B2B. And we just wasted the time 2 years only thinking that B2C is going to be it. But then afterwards, suddenly Intel got in touch with us and they said that we wanted, and that just just blew our mind. And we are like, okay, we are just wasting our time here. Let's go to Silicon Valley. We went to Silicon Valley. Intel was our first customer, and then we thought that yes, B2B is the way to go, and selling in the US is what it is. Because we went in Europe, I spent time in Europe. Mm-hmm. We were trying to pitch to the pharma companies in Germany. They were not ready to talk to you first because, understanding the psyche of the market is really important. And then I really understood is that, Germans would not work with you if you are a startup. But when we actually got Intel as a client and we went to the same customer and said that, Intel is using it, they're like, okay, please take our check. So, you need to understand first B2B versus B2C, which market to go on with, and then, go on with the challenges, and, you will not be, wasting that kind of time.
Fantastic. This is great insight. So I'll turn it over to Venkat. Venkat, how many 30 startups you advised, mentored, invested in? You've seen them from early on. What are the challenges?
Depends on the stage, depends on where they are. But one point I wanted to rebut, if you're a B2C company in India, you cannot have a global exit. Don't necessarily agree. The biggest exits we have seen so far happens to be a B2C company in India acquired by Walmart. And more to come. So my thesis, whether I'm an investor or an advisor or mentor, it's all about focusing on product companies. And this happened because when I was in the Bay Area, I watched the Israeli diaspora helping small tech companies become large corporations. I told myself when I come back to India, I would do that exactly in terms of helping small product startups. So my thesis is I'm pretty agnostic of the industry, but it has to be disruptive tech or business model, deep IP, and potential to go scale globally. So this is basically my thesis, and then obviously I look at the team. So the challenges, whether it is B2C, B2B, most of my startups I'm involved are B2B, and unfortunately, and I second the comments made earlier about India as a market, especially for B2B companies. And quite frankly, the general advice I give is use India as a test bed. Get the product to a state, and then you want to go scale in a market where the product is going to be adopted. Right. It's an unfortunate story, but it's changing a little, but that's a general comment I would like to make. Second, when it comes to funding, especially when it comes to deep tech, we hear the great India story in terms of investments, etc., but very, very few investors. There are very few options for very significantly deep tech companies here to find the investors here.
Venkat, can I raise my hand?
Yes, please. I was going to give a plug-in. So the exception, the outlier is a Bharat Fund, for example. Yeah. So there are very few, which means the kind of help I provide is give them connections directly back to the US in terms of, okay, if you can't get the customers here, if you can't get the investors here, you have no choice but to go cross-border.
Perfect, got it. The second area, right, this actually came up pretty broad last couple of weeks as we were talking about the scaling up and exiting the M&A masterclass. The responses that I heard from a lot of startups, gosh, you're talking about M&A, too early. I'm building my product, don't even bother disturbing me now. I'm trying to get customers. I mean, frankly speaking, as a startup CEO, it's a 24/7 job. Many of us have been there, right? And it's a tremendous pressure just to keep the lights on, right? You can't get them to go and talk with every investor, every possible acquirer and socializing with them. So what are the bare minimums you gotta do, you absolutely have to do during those times? So we'll start with you, Shrikant. I mean, you guys socialized very early on. I mean, was it planned? Was it kind of the thought process that we gotta do it even before you had a product? What went on?
Absolutely. I think you know, in the Silicon Valley, all the investors, what they actually tell the first entrepreneur is that get in touch with the potential angel investors and VCs even before you have the product. Just show your face to them. That's it. Do not ask for money. You know, and trust me on that one. And that kind of attitude is now come to India as well. Is that, you know, investors would love to just like, you know, listen to you, you know, even if it's like even for 10 minutes, but just, you know, meet them and just tell them that, hey, I'm planning to do this, because they already have mapped in their own strategy. Like Bharat Fund has already mapped their strategies. They are going to focus only on deep tech and AI and stuff like that. And then, you know, just make a list, make an Excel list. I have 1,000 angel investors and VC list in my Excel. I'm not kidding, seriously.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So, you know, make a list, and plus, you know what, just do one thing, is that, you know, these VCs are also a startup in themselves. Like every year, if you go to the Silicon Valley, you know, about 10% of the VCs will be shutting down their shop. So, you know what, just mark an email to these guys. If the email bounces, you know that, you know, those guys have shut shop.
So true.
So, you know, that's what it is. The first thing is that make a list that these are the angel investors and the VCs are in your field. Go and meet them. Then afterwards, go and meet your, you know, potential acquirers as well. You know, this is the bare minimum you should be doing, and see what they are looking for. Because essentially, as a CEO, when, you know, as Som correctly mentioned, is that, you know, everyone is just like so busy just to make the right product and making revenue and stuff like that. All I would say is that keep the mergers and acquisition, the exit strategy, not in the front, not in the center or in back of your mind, but just keep it there somewhere that, you know, you would never know when that actual phase would come in. Because companies are not sold, they are actually bought.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Pankaj, question to you. One fine day, Shrikant walks in without a product, with a PowerPoint presentation. Would you even entertain him?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, even from a corporate's perspective, I think it's important for corporates to keep a pulse on the ecosystem. But I agree. I mean, the last thing that should be done is for a startup to suddenly come just before their round is closing and say, hey, corporate, do you want to invest or buy us? That doesn't work. That has never worked. And you'll be astonished at the number of startups that actually do that. So I'm completely with Shrikant here that even from a corporate's perspective, it's a long-term relationship, and it should be done as soon as possible. I think there's something to be said for the startup's ability to absorb the kind of interaction that a big corporate can give, and the corporate's ability to move at the pace that the startup wants. So there's a, you know, there's kind of matchmaking on both sides that goes on here, and it takes time, but that's the reason it takes time. So yeah, I think definitely there should be a longer term play here.
A dialogue.
A dialogue here before either party is ready to move.
Venkat, any thoughts, any comments? When is the right time to even think about?
So the way I look at founders, on one extreme is I am building this product for Cisco, it's Cisco or bust, okay, on one extreme. On the other extreme is I am building this IPO all the way, and I think one has to find a right medium somewhere, because you can't count on one Cisco acquiring you and high risk. At the same time, IPOs, as we all know, it's a very, very small percentage. So to the point about is the M&A strategy front, back, center, I would say it's always parallel. And I think we should not ever distract the team, rest of the team, but the CEO or the main founder should always have this as a parallel strategy, if you will, and like think it through. And it's very important because it's a journey. And I do believe that if you are creating value, you're building something that is of value to customers, partners, good things happen. But good things does not happen without a plan. That means you also need to have a plan of action without distracting the rest of the company. And that is the balance that a CEO has to strike in terms of taking advantage of the right opportunities, the right timing, and so on and so forth.
And so this comes, right? I mean, as what are the avenues even for socializing the startup to the potential acquirers, right? I mean, think about at the trenches out here. You are in India, you are struggling to keep the lights on, you might or might not have funding, or maybe a small amount of funding, right? What are the avenues you guys suggest? So should he just catch the next flight to Silicon Valley and start meeting up a couple of potential acquirers? How would he even, is it LinkedIn? No response from LinkedIn, right? The usual stuff all of us have gone through, right? How do you get even talking? Why would they even think about talking with a small startup in Bangalore? Yes, you might be developing something, or is it these venues like this that we showcase? What would be the avenues? What could potentially ISA, TIE, IoT Forum could help? I mean, should we, as iSpirit has done, should we just start taking delegations after delegations to the Bay Area, right? Any thoughts on that, Venkat?
Yeah, delegations are good. iSpirit, NASCOM, a lot of people. So at least you get the exposure for the founders here to understand where the bar is, or what the expectations are. That said, it is not an excuse because I'm a small startup sitting in India, I don't get the visibility. There is a factor. So somebody like Freshdesk has cracked it in terms of, you can sit here and get to the visibility. I call this like the nuisance factor. So that means you can, let's say you go and close a customer deal which a large player was trying to get and you were nowhere in the radar, suddenly you get in the radar. Do the second deal, third deal, you beat them, suddenly you're more than a nuisance. If you are a much earlier stage where you can't really close deals, at least get into the right forums, online forums and other places, and talk and discuss. And I don't believe in trash talking, but a lot of these large companies with their legacy products and solutions have a lot of what's. Okay, they hide it, package it in a nice game. You just like expose it. So in other words, this is like nuisance factor going and pricking at the right people. You get attention, and obviously you now turn the attention into something more meaningful in the eyes of potential partners, investors, and so on and so forth. So there are, just like people talk about in marketing, the so-called guerrilla marketing, even in this place, there are like guerrilla tactics one can, and which means there has to be a plan. This does not happen just like by happenstance. So you need to have a really sustained plan on saying which market, where do I get visibility, how, etc.
And this is a question to Arvind, and obviously, when a startup approaches you and so forth, right? You lead them on to their development, your product teams, you get them talking with the corporate development team and so forth. But frankly speaking, these guys are also sitting in headquarters. And believe me, we have all gone through this in the corporate world, right? And out of sight, out of mind, right? Unless and until you go talk with them or they come out here, they don't frankly entertain that, gosh, it's again a small startup sitting out there. What are your thoughts? I mean, should the startups do something different?
I want to add to...
I will ask you. I'll come back to you as well. But Pankaj or Arvind, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm talking to startups who are potential investment targets, You know, I always tell them that, you know, you're working with a corporate here. It's going to be a long road. So you better have the patience for this. Because imagine it's a humongous organization, 100,000 people, 100 different countries, business units, headquartered in various places. So first of all, you got to impress me enough for me to take it forward. The local team has to appreciate your technology. So, you know, luckily for us at ABB in India, we have 95% of every business that we're in is represented here in Bangalore. So, you know, we can do a quick screening right here. But of course, the final investment is going to take time. So I think I really appreciate some of the startups that we've started working with this year. We've got 5 of them right now working on doing POCs or pilots or actual customer projects, either with R&D or with the business units. But there's no guarantee. I mean, they know that, and they're trying their best, and it's not easy for them. Neither is it for ABB when you're dealing with customer data and, you know, for example, getting that and feeling nervous about bringing in a new party in front of your customers, for example. But there's actually one guy, we've been talking to him for 2 years now. 2 years, and he finally signed an MOU with us, with one of our businesses in June this year. And actually did joint bids. So, you know, he's on the road.
Fantastic. Okay.
Maybe the investment will happen, maybe not. So you need a lot of patience. And you need to have that vision about that you really want to work with this corporate, because you think and you appreciate that the technology or the domain expertise they can bring you. It's not for the money. I'm quite sure money is available in other places. Mm-hmm. If it were only for the money, then none of the startups would come to ABB Technology Ventures. Mm-hmm. It's for the, you know, collaboration, the trust and the mutual respect and, you know, that kind of work ethic that they want to come work with us.
Got it. So over to you, Dr. Shaikh Moses. I mean, again, reaching out to the potential acquirers, even for Israeli startups in the early days, we probably had the same problem, right? The decision makers were all sitting in US or Europe. Mostly there were R&D centers in Israel, right? How did the Israel startups do? Did they immediately go in and set up shop in the valley? What were the challenges they faced and how did they overcome it? Now we hear all success stories, but I think the journey they went through, we would be interested to hear that.
Sure. So for many Israeli companies, again, because the market itself is small, they set shop immediately in the Bay or in the US. It is quite a natural step for them to do, and with that, the experience is coming and people are involved. Of course, it's becoming more and more supportive in that way. But you see, also from here, we are escorting many companies, startups, to do these kinds of exploration of India. And you can see that you don't have one rule, for example. One first-time entrepreneur is not like a serial entrepreneur, right? Someone with experience knows how to deal with these kinds of challenges that you raise up. So if you don't have any kind of connections, yes, you are in a problem. You are in a difficult situation. So I guess one of the things is to, at least when you're building your startup, and again, the product has to be great. Yeah? Otherwise, we are not even talking about. So then you have to invest time in your business development and business mindset and your partners and friends and colleagues and whoever can promote you in that regard, and also make difficult choices. For example, what we do with when we get approached is usually that we will try always to be engaged with a bigger company or MNC over a paid pilot or paid POC. Never do a free POC. Although the startup, he wants the exposure. So this is natural for him to say, okay, I want to expose myself, so maybe it will be benefit. But then to spend like 2 years in a process that maybe in the end nothing comes out, it's a very long time for a very good startup that needs to choose.
So Arvind,
With-
ABB willing to pay
with-
for paid POCs?
With,
Great.
with which MNC to work.
Yes.
Don't sell yourself short.
Good. So we'll kind of move on, and then I'll open it up for the audience. A couple of quick pieces. We talked about reaching out, potentially scaling India, outside India. Let's talk a bit on the M&A considerations, right? So obviously there are different kinds of M&As. We go acqui-hires, sell a bit too early, exit out, and these are probably great for first-time entrepreneurs. But overall key considerations for M&A, right? Obviously there are macro factors involved, money raised, the amount of hotness for that sector, right? Is it hot or and so forth? The market timing, traction. Traction essentially means, is it pipeline or is it real revenue, right? So Venkat, you are probably the best person to talk through. At what point would you think about you're planning your actual, executing on your M&A strategy?
As I said, it should always be in parallel. Ideally, just like within a couple of people and not distract the entire company. So you're making a judgment call on, okay, I raise another $50 million then I get to this stage. How feasible is that versus, because if I raise this 50 million at this valuation, the number of exit opportunities reduces. So you're making some major decisions ahead of a next round of raise and so on and so forth. The other thing to think about is it'll be ideal to have multiple acquirers interested in you. So there is like you are like the bride that a lot of people are coming after. So what do you get, how do you get to a stage where...
We call it Swayamvar.
Oh, okay, so there you go. So my fundamental belief, somebody talked about excellence in the product as a solution. You created a really valuable entity, good things happen. Then you can really execute on a plan, get the Swayamvar and get to see that. But it is also about, am I going for an acqui-hire stage, meaning, okay, my team has reached the limit, there is only so much I can do, but this product is probably in the hands of a larger player, in a bigger infrastructure, in a bigger canvas. Maybe it will see its full potential, for example. Then you make a call saying, for this product, for my idea to realize its full potential, it's better off in the hands of this body. I think it's a good call. So it's not always money. It's also like, okay, why did you start the company? Is it like the dream to have the impact of your idea impacting the industry? And maybe if you can't do it, perhaps in the hands of a larger player, yeah, it is. So those are like some of the factors one would have to think. But most importantly is in the hands of the other party. So you might have made commitments to your customers, partners, and make sure any potential acquirer there's a cultural fit, they are going to keep your promises and commitments, and your employees can go and thrive there. So these are all factors in the choice of the right destination where you want to end up with.
Yeah, so Venkat, if you are a seasoned entrepreneur, done it probably a couple of times, at least once,
Right.
probably better off, right? Understanding these nuances and so forth. But as a first-time entrepreneur, they probably have multiple advice and feedback coming from multiple sources.
Sure.
Gosh, their investor is telling something, their advisor mentor is telling something. So what have you seen in your journey as an advisor? Are we Indians, are we receptive to advice? Question number one. Question number two is, frankly speaking, many times I have seen, we hit the road first, we hit the wall, then we recoil back. But we should be learning a lot more from past mistakes of other entrepreneurs and so forth.
So this goes back to the maturity of the ecosystem. And in the Bay Area, there are mentors and advisors with scars on the back.
Yeah.
They are willing to help. That means, okay, don't repeat my mistakes.
Correct.
And to a really good entrepreneur, it is to, okay, you don't repeat the same mistakes. And that's very important. At least me as an advisor, I have a rigorous process actually, more rigorous than if I'm an investor, because if I'm going to be putting my own time and effort and much more my reputation with that company, it is very important to make that determination. Is the founder coachable? is the person willing to learn? And that is absolutely critical. And the second point is to the imagination and the thinking. One of the factors I've seen with a lot of the entrepreneurs here, the aspiration or the ambition is sort of limited. I think at least to start with, if your ambition or expectation should be higher, then you will strive to improve and get the excellence. And it's very important. So it's a combination of all those things, including coachability.
Okay. Shai, any thoughts from Israeli founders and so forth? I mean, they also probably went through this process of learning, but now probably it's a pretty healthy network of individuals who can guide them and so forth.
You know, in Israel, they say because it's a small market, everybody knows each other.
Yeah.
But you know what I find also in India, everybody knows each other whenever you need something and you have the relevancy for that. So here in India, you see already some very great entrepreneurs, right? They are very big and leading by example, angels and serial entrepreneurs in different kinds of sectors. And again, I guess if you're inside the field, inside the sector, and you have a good, great product, you can approach them in a way. People are nice, people are warm. In India, in Israel, they are willing to have these kinds of discussions, but of course they don't want you to waste their time. So if you have the good pitch and you have the good product, I think it's rather accessible here in India to approach them.
So my sense is, right, obviously there is a lot of, we Indians love to give free advice, right, as well. So be very cautious about whom you are talking to. So my sense is talk with seasoned guys who have done it before, find out, reach out to the folks who have actually gone through that journey. So they are probably the guys who have scars on their back. They're probably the right folks to tell you, at least share their experiences with you. So I'll go with one last question.
But Som, I have to also
please.
to add
Please.
that, you can never really avoid these kinds of scars,
Yeah.
I guess, right? So you have to, in a way, also enjoy
Getting the scars. Huh?
when you fail. This is also important that I see from the Israel ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's no shame or problem to fail. As long as you believe in yourself and you believe the product, there are so many reasons why to fail.
Not after we invest. Before investing, it's okay.
So enjoy the failure.
Why did you give me
I think the point you make about this CEO having openness to listen to advice, it's the same kind of advice that I've done a lot of sales coaching as well. And the first rule of business is never fall in love with your product, because tomorrow you're going to have to sell something else. And I try to scare the ABB guys saying, hey, don't focus so much on your inverters and drives, because tomorrow your inverter is going to be in the cloud. And they get upset with me, but the idea is to challenge their thoughts. So what kind of person are you? And there are two kinds of salespeople. There are the guys who look like foxes with big ears, and then there are the crocodiles, big mouth, small ears. So you don't want to be a crocodile CEO either. You need to have the humility to accept when your investors, your other advisors are telling you that you need to adapt and know when it's time to let go.
Right. So
one point I make to advisors also, even with the best intention, be careful how you communicate. You start by saying your baby is ugly, the guy is going to shut you down. So it's a balance.
Correct. So I'll just go to the last question and then we'll open it up. So one big piece concern that we heard from a lot of even the Valley veterans and so forth, and I was in US for 6 weeks, I heard these comments loud and clear. A lot of people say, gosh, again, Indian startup founders, we Indians have a problem of giving up equity, right? We are raising, we want to really scale, we want to really go for, and the timeline is pretty short. And we don't want to raise money to scale because we don't want to give up equity. I mean, how have you guys kind of come across these incidents? Is it just one-off case, or do we have a problem? Venkat, over to you. You're probably the best guy to talk about.
I don't want to stereotype, but the answer is yes. But as long as you have a good vision, can execute. Now, a Vijay Shekhar Sharma does not have that problem, clearly. But a Sridhar Vembu of Zoho, you may call that a problem, but in his own right, is very successful.
Agreed.
So it's not a question of this versus that. It is just like, what is the opportunity cost, and am I hurting the company's acceleration because of this one issue? So in the Zoho case, he's going on a trajectory. It's okay. He's not diluting. So God bless him. So it depends on the situation.
Got it, got it. Sounds good. So I'd like to open this up for any questions. The mics are here. Please.
Hello.
Just identify yourself, and if you have question for a specific individual, please do.
So I'm Ramesh. I'm founder of Ignitarium. So we build solutions for smart industry. I have a question regarding when should the startup approach corporate or investors? So there was a view that has been shared here. There is another view that whenever we are actually approaching a corporate or investor, the first question that has been asked is whether do you have a customer or not. So typically people advise to go once you have a MVP in place and then you have a few customers, only then people will listen to us. So just the question is like, are you guys really looking, really okay to look at only the technology part and ready to invest or even support startups?
Okay. Will we talk to you even if you don't have your first customer or product? Of course we will.
So I think the point is,
I mean, I think it depends on the person. I'd like to keep in touch with startups, even if they're not viable investment opportunities just yet. It's good to know that you're around, because next year I'm also going to be looking for investment opportunities, and the year after, hopefully. So at that time, you may be ready.
so at some point it needs to be exciting enough for Arvind or Pankaj to kind of look at you, right? Even to hear your story. And I think that's what this gentleman did. He went in before the product was ready. He socialized the concept. He talked about it. I think that the storytelling is very essential.
And just to add to that, right, a customer is a proxy for demonstrating your product has value, right? That's why investors or some investors and corporates would say at least have a customer. But if you can demonstrate that it has value, even though you don't necessarily have a customer, whether it's your pitch, whether it's your conviction, whether it's references, whatever it is, something which is very core to someone and has value, I think that works. So don't be necessarily shy about that, would be my suggestion, and start building those relationships early.
Also, don't put people in a bucket called corporate or investor. Because
Thank you.
there are corporates and there are corporates, and even within one single VC partnership, each partner could have a different thesis and level of risk. So do your research before approaching people.
Okay, so my question is on the angel industry as such, right? Around few years back, angel is a rich uncle or a real estate traditional business money whom you happen to know. I hear Mumbai Angels and movements like that has organized the angel industry, like you come together and then form a team and then that becomes the angel. So especially for you, you said you prepared a list of 1,000 angels for VCs. What are your notes? Like, is the organized angel pretty significant, or is it still angel is a rich guy who wants to help the entrepreneurs?
And how did you go about this? We are also interested to know, right?
Yeah, if you can put that list on the Twitter, if with the approval of people, it will be great.
That will be another masterclass. How to search for angels. Or devils.
I was just gonna answer that. I think I'm gonna be hammered for speaking this on the podium, but I'll still do it because I don't want to be the guy who's like siding with one thing. But I will sincerely tell you that if you do have an option of taking the VC money or angel money or not, please do not take the money. There are many now examples, like, you must have heard of Native, which was, the guy was selling a deodorant in the US, and they exited for $100 million. Then last year, another exit was Tuft and Needle, which is, they were selling mattresses. They started by like two guys, just put in their $6,000 of their own money, and they exited for $500 million. VCs were burning out like everywhere. Right. So, again, don't forget that, VCs or angels, they are like angels or something. They are also there in the business. They are there because they want to make money off you, right? It's not like a charity business or something like that. So, right now we are in an age where we have got thousands of avenues of raising money. So, before, giving your equity and stuff, make sure that, if you can tap in, and if you are really, really confident, go to Bank of India. Take money from them. Seriously, I'm not kidding. Just go and apply for a loan, take personal loans. Take personal loans for 15 lakhs. That's a lot of money. 15 lakhs is a lot of money. You can start with the MVP, get customers, and then you would be very, very confident. It's just very simple. I mean, I started investing as well right now. But, now I'm seeing from the other side of the table, it's like, I see that, people come to me and say that, I've not invested any of my money, but I want you to invest $10,000. But, as now on the other side of the table, I would be saying that, if you are not confident enough of that whether your business is not gonna work or not, and you're not investing your money or whatever, your Uncle Tom's money, why should I invest my money, right?
Very good point.
So,
Questions, please, on this side.
Hi, I'm Ramji, co-founder of Matriot Solutions. This is a generic question. Typically, for an IoT company or an IoT startup, there is a lot of involvement in terms of hardware and the R&D and other stuff. Typically, the ecosystem currently involves more of investments on IoT startups, which also specializes on AI and ML. And this scenario, hurts to some extent on the IoT startup who are very focused on a specific solution. Is this scenario is expected to change in the future, or how is it? How do you see this entire ecosystem from an ecosystem standpoint? Because there is a slow adoption from the customer angle, and also since the investment perspective, the VCs also look from the perspective that their money is expected to exit over a period of time. So there is a slight focus on AI, IoT startups, but specializing on AI or blockchain rather than on hardware specific thing. Is this scenario expected to change?
I want to comment something. So, again, from what I see, because again, we are a diplomatic mission, we are scouting companies that are coming not from the inside. But what we see is that the more technical your product is, the more you need this kinds of validation from a big company, then it's making more sense to be involved in a VC-backed funding, and more specifically in a specialized kind of a VC that knows to evaluate your products, especially in industrial IoT. I guess there is more and more need to have a professional money coming inside than just a more general angel or horizontal player. Now, also depends on your sector. There is a company, Israeli company, doing IoT for cats. Okay, they're doing these kinds of water dispenser, the food dispenser, and the playground for cats are all connected with the sensors, with the user, and apparently they reach a nice market in the US because the US, they really love their cats. So in that sense, they don't need actually go on. They're actually getting some revenue already from the market. And says so, but usually this is the exception, And again, in Israel also the B2C is the exception.
Yeah. To answer your question from my perspective, I think the hardware is slowly becoming commodity, and yeah, it's true. The AI and machine learning or whatever, and the data analytics that you get out of the IoT is more interesting, and will continue to be so for a while. I think you should focus on, what you're actually doing with the data and which industry you're focusing on. If you have a focus, that makes you immediately more interesting to, at least from a corporate VC perspective, maybe even other VCs.
Just to add, I was based in Switzerland for this posting here, and in that regard, we were facilitating with ABB and water technology company called Takadu. We're doing some water leakages detections in pipelines and so on. So once, and by the way, back then it was a really small startup in a way, and again, after they also got exposure with the WEF and others, so we see this interest from ABB. So in that sector, it was very natural to have a strategic partner like ABB. It was, so it depends on the sector, depends on the products you do, that you're looking for the relevant investor.
And from a investor interest perspective or a corporate perspective, I think only two things matter, right? So if you just remove all these distractions of buzzwords, right? AI, ML, all that crap, right? Just focus on, number one, is it a business that you can scale? If you can do it with hardware, that's awesome. Don't even look back, right? Number two, is this something you can build a competitive moat around? Hardware is commoditizing. If you can still do it, great. It's going to be super tough to do it, but if you think you've cracked it, more power to you. So I would suggest, remove those distractions, focus on those two things.
And pick an investor from that domain who understands, and not a typical financial investor looking for a return in 7 years or so. If this requires a longer gestation period, etc., I think that's what you have to do, right?
Go ahead, please.
I'm glad to see Dr. Shai Moses here. I was excited to see your presence here. There should be some strong reason that a consular officer from Trade and Economic Affairs on the podium. So I am interested in knowing when India is facing crisis in terms of agriculture, where you people converted deserts into green pastures, and we know how drip irrigation has come to India only because of Israel. Okay, that's one. So we would like to see, and I would like to interact with you. I am from the SAP background and software development. I am a vice president in Informatics India Limited, and I am Johnson Thigla. So I would like to interact with you more. And my question would be, in the emerging world of industrial IoT, here people are from IoT, I am from BHL, and we have used a lot of ABB products, and I see Sai Vasu here. So on terms of industrial IoT, you can throw some light. And in terms of security, part of my forte, I would like to know what you have funded or you have encouraged in new startups.
So thank you. I want to take your question and reflect on this issue. Look, industrial IoT now coming in many sectors, also agriculture. And you see more and more agri-tech companies trying to innovate and looking for solutions for agriculture, which is very important in India, in Israel, and elsewhere. But you see, in industrial IoT, you have some sectors that are more inclined to adopt these kinds of new technologies, and you have sectors that are more resistful in a way. So you see, for example, you have the drones, you have the sensors, you can use the satellites. You need also the appetite and the approvals, let's say the willingness of the farmers and the agribusiness sectors to adopt these kinds of IoT solutions. Once you have that, then you are developing a very interesting market there. So I think my hunch is that the IoT for agriculture and the same for traditional manufacturing, which India is very famous for all different kinds of manufacturings. You need to have this awareness of the traditional industries of agriculture to adopt these new technologies. And the new technologies will be into the IoT.
Got it. So
Thank you.
we will probably take 2 questions. Please. Yeah, we'll take.
Yeah, hello, my name is Sumant. I am the founder of a security consulting firm called Deep Armor in Bangalore. This panel discussion was pretty interesting in the sense that most of the conversation revolved around products, something that you can build, something that can be an IP. But from a VC and corporate's perspective, how do you view startups that are working on consulting and providing services that are not really associated with building a product, but can still have that coolness factor or the hotness factor that you're talking about, right? So cybersecurity, everyone says it's necessary, it's important, it's hot.
So,
but
Pankaj, you're the right guy to answer this.
So let's talk, first of all. So I think, from an investor perspective, the challenge comes in scaling. So a services business is inherently a people business. So it's almost like your ability to scale is limited to your ability to hire good people, not just hire, but hire good people. And I think that's what scares investors, which is, can you really grow at that pace which is necessary for investors to see a return or see some benefit, right? Acquisitions, I think, is a different story. So I think from an acquisitions perspective, yeah, I mean, there are many services firms in the country, and to the extent that there's a good fit there, I'm sure people will be looking at services plays there as well.
One last question, please.
I can add a comment to that is, from our perspective, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is ABB going to learn from you? We're interested in learning about new technology, new business models, maybe consulting services. Although I find we don't see much of that, but if you have something really unique, you need to sell that. If we can learn something by associating with you or by investing, I doubt we're going to invest like my colleague here says, but that's the question you need to ask yourself.
Yeah, I guess the basic question, how are you guys different from Aegis, Palladian, Wipro, and everybody else?
So
Anyway,
I'll just add to this. In 2009, I had, 2008, I had started a services company. 2007, iPhone started, and I started a services company. I hired one part-time developer in Bangalore, and then scaled to 70 people in 2 years.
Wow.
And you know what? And it's like, obviously we wanted to get acquired, and we got, we were looking and we were getting. Let's get to the ground statistics. If you're a services business, okay, no matter what everyone tells you, the max multiple which you will get is 3x of your yearly revenue.
Current year revenue. Yeah.
This is super important. Current year revenue, right? So that's being generous. You know what? We were offered 1.5 by Hinduja. 1.5x of that current revenue. And I was so frustrated, I was really depressed. I was like, man, we were like struggling so much on getting all the contracts and stuff like that, and this is what we are getting, it's not worth it. It was just not worth it, like, of your time spent. I quit that business. I went to Bombay, we started Diabeto, which got acquired.
What was the multiple?
100x.
Now you
100x was the multiple for Diabeto.
Okay.
So now you get that.
So, gentlemen, I am hearing that we have to close this. This was a pretty interesting discussion. Any last comments? Any one of you?
Have a plan.
Have a scale up and M&A plan, right? Potential acquisition plan. A roadmap. Yeah.
Mike Tyson says that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. I would like to thank you, all the panelists. And Surya. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, please. Arvind? Go. Thank you very much. Okay, a group photo, please. Come on.